like to thank Sean for that piece of advice that if you don't drink, you don't get into trouble. I spent the morning writing a speech, and I brought it in and I gave it to Paddy earlier on, and he scrunched it up and said, "Oh my God, no." And he gave me the speech that he wanted me to read. I thought that was a bit too humiliating, so I just took notes. I hope I don't say anything, Paddy, that you told me not to say. And I say all of the things that you told me to say. The first thing he told me to say was that the Linkage program was very successful. It's done wonderful work over the last several years. That the Department of Justice gave wonderful support to the parole board where Brian Gibson. He told me not to say anything about the contrast of the prison conditions and these officers at the Probation Service. He also told me to say that IBEC and is really wonderful, and yes. And also that Tina Roach was magnificent. But I knew that. I knew that in any event. The other things that he told me to say was that we have to look at the issue of prisoners in an overall societal context, and it arises out of the conditions of deep inequality in our society and huge disadvantage. If you look at Paul O'Mahony did a survey of Mountjoy Prison a number of years ago to look at the socio-economic background of prisons in Mountjoy, and showed, but we all know anyway, that the vast preponderance of prisoners in Mountjoy come from disadvantaged areas. We know also from recent research published in the wonderful book called The Spirit Level, that societies that are more unequal have higher rates of imprisonment, significantly higher rates of imprisonment, the worst of course being the most unequal society in the developed world, the United States. But there's an obvious gradient between societies that are more equal, like the Scandinavian countries and Japan, oddly enough, and the societies that are hugely unequal, like the United States, like Mexico, like the United Kingdom, and like Ireland, that imprisonment rates are significantly higher. But so too are all the other social ills to do with welfare, to do with the health welfare, to do with obesity, to do with teenage pregnancy, to do with mortality, or literacy, everything else. The more unequal society is, the worse it is by all these other criteria. And the reason that most people get into prison is because of social disadvantage. Yes, there are other factors involved. Yes, there is badness involved in some instances, but social disadvantage is a huge factor with regard to all of that. There's also a thing to do with the bias in our perception of criminality, and that we perceive criminality very much as the infractions of the poor. We hardly ever see criminality in terms of the appalling social harm done by the richer elements of society. And most of us are mystified by how it is that when blatantly and obviously crimes of enormous consequence were committed in the banking business, in the accountancy affair, and across a whole range of professions in relation to the financial collapse that we've recently gone through. Not a single person is being prosecuted as yet. There's something really bizarre about that, and people who engage in minor criminality by comparison end up in jail. There's something seriously wrong in regard to all this. There's also, of course, conditions in prison which reflect our general disregard and disrespect for people from socially deprived backgrounds. Conditions which are really appalling, and I don't understand how, for instance, priority was given that instead of building new prisons or doing something about the atrocious conditions in Mountjoy and the atrocious conditions in Cork Prison and in Limerick Prison, that instead of dealing with that, we gave priority to, for instance, building a new criminal court down near the Phoenix Park. Yes, it's a wonderful building. Yes, there are advantages, but how come does that get priority over the conditions in which people are forced to live in Mountjoy, Cork and Limerick prisons. Equally, I cannot understand how Farmley, that bloody place out there, that went on sale for 13 million, and a bloody genius Minister for Government bought it on behalf of the state for 22 million. That's right, it went for sale for 13 million, and the bloody genius bought it for 22 million on behalf of the state, and cost another 20 million to do up. What was the reasoning that gave priority to that folly over dealing with something in dealing conditions in the prisons? Then, of course, there's the issue of drugs. Pat Rabbitt did a report. He led a task force on drugs in 1997, and he published a report at the beginning of 1997, although the task force started earlier. And the report coloured in the area of hard drug abuse in Dublin. And if you were to have a map of the deprived areas of Dublin, it would be exactly the same. So the problem of hard drug use is almost entirely a problem of deprivation again. Yes, it is extended out into middle class communities of late, but fundamentally the havoc that drugs have caused has been in deprived areas and is directly linked to deprivation. Pat Rabbitt made the point in that report that the only way of dealing with the problem of hard drug abuse was to deal with the issue of deprivation, but of course nothing was done. All of this, the problems related to prisons, the problem related to prisons and all that, arise from a dysfunctional society, and a deeply dysfunctional society, and I think that we have got to recognise that. It is fantastic the work that you do and the work the Probation Service does and other services do in ameliorating the worst consequences of that dysfunctionality. But politically we've got to deal with the dysfunctionality itself, which requires radical social and political change. When I spoke to Paddy earlier on, I asked him how long I should speak for. Oh, by the way, before I tell you this, what Paddy told me, I should tell you that I was invited to speak to a luncheon meeting in Limerick a number of years ago, and I got up to speak at 2:30, and I turned to the chairman and said, how long should I talk for? And he said, you can talk for as long as you like, but we're going to develop 3. I asked Paddy how long I should talk for, and he said I should talk for as long as he talked, which would take us to about 7:10. I'm afraid I can't string out Paddy's thoughts and all. All of this is Paddy's stuff. I don't believe Paddy's stuff. All of this is Paddy's stuff. But anyway, I've forgotten the rest of the stuff that Paddy told me. I apologize for that. Thank you very much.